Hello, my name is Marian Petrov and I'm Grandmaster from Bulgaria. Welcome to this course. The idea of this course is to show you most popular openings, almost all, after the move e4. So I have covered after the move e4 when black reply e5, so all the possible openings, which are all kind of gambits, Italian game, Rui Lopez, Petrov defense, Koch defense, Philidor, and then of course also the other replies after e4, c5, c6, so Caro-Kann, Sicilian, French, Perk, Scandinavian. So this will give you an idea how to play if you want to switch to e4 move or you want to expand your opening knowledge a little bit. So in all of openings you will have some idea what to do, at least in the first maybe 10 moves. So today we are starting with our first chapter, and this is called Gambits. Probably some of you know what is the Gambit meaning. Gambit in chess means that this is an opening when you sacrifice a pawn or two, and sometimes even a piece, in order to have some advantage. Usually this advantage is when you make it in the opening, obviously. The idea is to have better development. So in order to exchange 1-2 pawns, we will get some rapid development, which will give us an early lead in the opening, since our opponent is busy taking our pawns and pieces. We can develop our pieces and attack potentially his king. Because the idea of the gambits is usually to have an attacking position and to check the enemy's king. Therefore, usually these gambits, the main idea in them is to keep the opponent kings in the center, because this is the place when he is most vulnerable, in the center. Probably you know that when you castle, then you make it more difficult for your opponent to attack your king. So today we're starting with the gambits, and let's see what is the first gambit here, which I want to show you, and this is the king's gambit, which starts with the move e4, e5, and then f4. So this is very interesting questions. How do you start to learn chess? I have been asked many times from my students, what is the first thing we should learn about chess? And usually I say to them, you have to follow the history of chess. What do I mean? That chess was developing during the years and with the ages. So we have to start from the beginning to know what was the main openings, let's say in the 19th century, why it changed after this, what was the evolution of the opening. And then we're going to see that there were some openings, for example, like gambits, like King's Gambit. And initially people thought that this is a very good opening, but then when they learn how to defend, they realized that white should search for some other openings, and then they invented other openings which became more popular than the King's Gambit. But we have to know why it happens and how it happens, so we can make our own evaluations and learn from the mistakes of the people who are making during these years. So it will be a little bit easier for us than it was to them. So we start with the move e4, e5, f4. What is the idea of the move f4? So obviously when you play e4, e5, the fight is in the center here, and both sides want to control more squares in the center. So that's why ideally white want to play e4 and then d4, and then they want to keep these two pawns in the center. But now the pawn on e5 is on the way of the pawn of the d2, so white wants to eliminate this pawn and exchange it for the f pawn. So then they can play later in the game d4. Of course, now black have many possible moves. They can take the pawn, they can defend it with the d6, let's say, or with the knight c6. They can also play moves like bishop c5, and even they can play their own counter gambit with the move d5. In that times, in the 19th century, it was a question of honor to play gambits and to sacrifice something and to try to checkmate your opponent. And also, when your opponent was sacrificing something, you usually had to accept his gift, because otherwise maybe people would think that you are afraid to take sacrifices. So that's why usually black were taking on f4. And now, if we want to follow our original idea to play d4 and take with the bishop on f4, unfortunately there is one very annoying check from h4 with the queen. So now white are in some kind of trouble, because obviously g3 then just black can take on g3 with the pawn, and if you play with the king, okay, this is not the best situation to have pawn down after 5 moves and our king to be in the center on the way of our bishop and our queen. That's why d4 was not working, and people invented another lines, which were the knight f3, which is the most natural move to defend, develop the knight, defend against the queen h4 check, and then you want to play d4 on the next move. And also the other move which was invented was bishop c4, developing the bishop on this diagonal, attacking on f7. And now again they want to play d4 and knight f3. And if, let's say, black play this queen h4 check now, it's a little bit different, because now we can move the king to f1. So this is not on e2, the bishop is already developed, and the king is not here on the way of the queen or to the other pieces. And also, which is very important, now when the queen is on h4, when we play knight f3, this will be with a tempo. So, okay, from one side we are moving the king, but then we are going to win one tempo. So here I'm going to show you the first game in this course and in this chapter, and it's maybe the best possible start, because this is one of the most famous games in chess, played in 19th century, and with white was the king of the chess in that time, Adolf Andersen. So let's follow this game. And here his opponent has played the move b5. This game was played in one of his matches against this guy Kiziritsky. And it was interesting that actually before this game they played the same line, and then Kiziritsky has won the game. But this time Andersen has made an improvement in his game. So okay, obviously b5 is not the best possible move for black, but like I told you in that time, it was a question of honor to sacrifice something, to be more attractive attacking player, so therefore b5 was played, and white took the pawn on b5. Now knight f6. Knight f6 is not maybe the best possible move, because now after knight f3, black is starting to have some problems with the queen. So we're seeing here that queen h4 check is maybe not the best move for black, because now the queen is in trouble. So they decided to go to h6 in order to defend the pawn on f4. And then d3 was played, which is more modest move. It was possible to play maybe e5 and knight c3. So white can try to play d4 in one move. But Andersen decided that d3 is a good enough move, because now he's attacking this pawn on f4, and sometimes maybe he can try to play even moves like g3. And now again, very strange but interesting move for black, knight h5. Okay, so it's not maybe the best move, because all these pieces are not developed, both bishops are not developed, the other knight, and white are moving for the second time the knight. And moreover, they put in a knight on h5, which usually he is not in a good position. But there is one little threat here, which is knight g3 check. So in order of knight c3 or any move which white can make, black will play knight g3. And then after pawn takes, they are going to win the rook here. But now this funny move was met, but equally funny move for white, which was knight h4. So this is like some kind of knight dance. First of all, this move is defending white from knight g3 check, because then knight g3, white can just take the knight. And then this knight wants to go to f5, and from here he will attack this queen on h6. So this is an interesting way to defend from black's threat. Queen g5 was played. Okay, now knight f5. And now black decided to play the move c6. Again, instead of developing some piece, which could be more useful, they decided to go c6, but I think they were expecting some move like bishop c4 and then bishop a4. And maybe they thought that actually if you play bishop c4, they can play d5, which will attack the bishop and the knight. But instead, Andersen decided to leave this bishop, and he played the move here g4, attacking the knight. So in case of pawn takes b5, I guess he's going to take on h5, and then maybe his intention was to play rook g1 to explore this open g file and put more pressure on this pawn on g7. Black decided to play knight f6, and now rook g1 was played, defending the pawn and leaving the bishop. So this is already a real sacrifice in Gambit, because he gives the bishop. And after pawn takes, he played the move h4. Now queen has to go back on g6. And okay, we have to see now what's going on after this sacrifice. What is the idea of white? They have obviously some kind of initiative, but is it enough to compensate the loss of the bishop? Now he found a very good move h5, attacking the queen. And after queen g5, queen f3 was played. So white wants to take with the bishop on f4, and this queen is in big trouble. So you see, from the first 30 moves, I think black have played 5 moves already with the queen. And even after these 5 moves, she is in very serious position. So now black are forced to play moves like knight g8, so the queen can escape. And after bishop f4, queen f6, he decided that it was not enough, this moves with the queen. So instead to going back to d8, he played queen f6. Okay, obviously e5 is not winning immediately, because then the queen can go to c6 and cover this diagonal. But instead white can play knight c3, developing the knight. So they have developed already most of their pieces, and all of them are in very good positions. The knight is very active, the other knight wants to jump to d5, bishop has a good diagonal, the queen is also here on this diagonal where the rook is in danger, the king is safe, and all the black pieces you see are not developed. After 50 moves, they have enough time to develop these pieces, but they decided to play only with the queen. And now, finally, they have developed one piece, the bishop on c5. So he's attacking the rook. So maybe black were hoping that white are going to move the rook, and then they will develop the knight. But Andersen was not thinking about this. So he just made this move knight d5, attacking the queen with a tempo. And also he has this idea to give knight c7 check and win the rook. The queen takes on b2, and now here maybe this is the most difficult and the most beautiful move in the game. So you see now both rooks are in danger, and if you start to think about how to defend the rooks, which means that your attack is not going to work, because when you attack and you sacrifice something, you cannot just switch and think about defense after in few moves. You should continue to attack. And now Andersen found bishop d6. This is very, very nice move, leaving both rooks. So now, for instance, if black take the rook, white should play the king on e2, not on g2, because then black will take on g1 with check. That's why the king has to go here. And now they can take on g1 with the queen or with the bishop. If they take with the queen, now it will be mate in 2 moves, which is with the move knight g7. The only square is to go to d8, and then bishop c7 is checkmate. So black didn't want to be checkmated so easy. So after this move bishop d6, since the bishop is attacked, they decided just to move the bishop to g1, take the rook. Because now this mate is not working. Knight g7, queen can take the knight on g7, and in case of knight c7 check, the king goes to d8, and for the moment he is safe. And again, there is no time to play some moves like rook e1, because black can use this time and to develop their pieces, and this will make things more difficult for white, so they have to hurry. And here we have already found our mating motive, which is knight takes g7, bishop c7. So we have to stop this to cut this diagonal, and white did it with the move e5, also very difficult move. Again, we are leaving the rook, so finally black took both rooks, king e2, and now they cannot defend the square on g7 with anything, so they decided to defend this square c7 from the possible checkmate with the bishop. So they played knight a6, now knight g7 was played, and king d8. And here white have maybe many wins. You can simply take queen takes f7, and then the threat is queen f8 checkmate, or bishop e7 checkmate, or many checkmates, but Andersen has found a very beautiful way to finish this game, and this is with the move queen f6 check. So now the knight should take the queen, and bishop e7 is a checkmate. So this game was called the immortal game, and you can see why. In the end, only 3 pieces, 2 knights and 1 bishop, has managed to win the game against the whole black army, with all the pieces and most of the pawns still on the board. So this is very beautiful game. And now let's continue with the other main line which I have shown to you. This is the move knight f3 instead of bishop c4. In this position, black can play basically whatever they want. They can play d6, d5, knight f6, there is such a move, knight e7 followed by knight g6, bishop e7 followed by bishop h4 check. But the most popular line, especially at that time, was the move g5. Okay, this is in the spirit of the century. First of all, defending the pawn on f4, and also with the move g5 you want to play at some point move g4 to attack the knight, and then maybe give this check from h4. And now here, in this position, white also have many moves in g5. They can play bishop c4, or knight c3, or d4. And d4 is one of the main moves, and the other move, which is also very popular, is the move h4. The idea of this move h4 is to challenge immediately this pawn on g5, and since now g takes it, h4 is not such a good idea, because then after d4 white simply are going to win these 2 pawns, and they're going to have better position. And h6 is also not very good idea, because after pawn takes, you cannot take with the pawn because the rook is hanging. So now black have to play the move g4. And after the move g4, there are 2 possible moves, knight e5 and knight g5. Knight g5 means that you are going to sacrifice this knight, because after h6 black can take this knight, so now you have to sacrifice on f7. This was also a possible line in the 19th century. There were many gambits in which white were sacrificing the knight. The other way, if you want to sacrifice the knight, is with the line with bishop c4, and then g4 was played, and now simply white were castling, and they're leaving the knight on f3. Even there are some lines in which they're sacrificing both pieces. They sacrifice the bishop on f7, and then they leave the knight on f3, in order to have this attack on the a-file. So there were many exciting lines in this King's Gambit. I'm going to show you now some other examples. Now I'm going to show you another classical games between 2 of the greatest players of the 19th century. With white was playing Paul Morphy. He was an American player who actually only played chess for a couple of years, but he went to Europe and beat all the top players, including Andersen, which was the best player in Europe. So we are going through this line with h4, g4, and now we are playing the move knight e5. From e5 the knight has many options, not only to sacrifice on f7, but he just can take the pawn back to g4, in case, let's say, he's attacked with d6. So in this game Andersen played knight f6 to defend the pawn, knight g4 is played, and now he took on e4. This is very interesting move. The The idea is, of course, to meet queen e2 with queen e7, and then it looks like this is okay for black. So now the things are looking actually not so bad for black, because there is this threat knight g3, and also they have a pawn up. They can play bishop g7 and castle, or they can try to develop maybe the other pieces, but Morphy has found a very interesting way to fight against this line, and he played the move d3, which looks like a mistake, because now after knight g3, okay, black are attacking the rook, and if you play the rook, black have many good moves. You have to play the move like rook h3 maybe, because otherwise the queen will take on h4, and rook h3, black can play just d5 or whatever they want, but Morphy plays the move bishop f4, sacrificing the rook only after 8 moves. And now black are more or less forced to take the rook. And now follows this idea, queen e2 check. Okay, this is very interesting, because after, if black play bishop e7, suddenly they're going to be checkmated only after 10 moves. Check here, and then bishop h6, checkmate. This will be a very interesting game, but of course Andersen is not such a bad player, so he has seen this, and he played the move queen e7. But Morphy now finds another beautiful combination. I think this was a home preparation. Even in the 19th century, I think some players are making home preparations without computers, of course. Knight f6 check. Now the only move is this, and now bishop takes c7. This is a very beautiful combination. Now black have to take the bishop, and now follows knight d5. So white have managed to win the queen, but this is not so simple, because black have plenty of pieces, and if black manage to develop the pieces and coordinate them, even they can have the advantage, because they have rook and 2 pieces, because the knight is still alive on h1. So in general, rook and 2 pieces are stronger than the queen. But now Morphy continued to find some very good moves. First of all, queen g4 was played to defend the pawn on h4, and also with idea to play queen h3 and take the knight. Now d6 was played, so queen h3 is not possible, but the queen goes to f4. Now the queen is attacking on f7, but also wants to go to h2. Rook g8 was played, so black wants to keep their knight, so they're intending to meet queen h2 with the move knight g3, and then they have better position actually, because the queen on h2 is going to be in a very bad position. That's why queen f7, just taking the pawn, bishop h4 was played, and now king d2, not king d1, because if king d1, then black can play knight f2 with a tempo in some situations, and now king d2 was played. So now the rook is hanging, so this is very complicated position. You cannot say definitely that, okay, because black have more pieces, they are better, or because white have a queen, they are better, but just this is very concrete. So now rook e8 looks a very good move, because now there is a threat, which is bishop e1, check, and if the king goes here, knight f2 check, or also bishop g5, for example, is very interesting. If they play knight c3, black can play bishop g5, check, and when you go here, now knight f2 checkmate is not possible, because the queen is defending, fortunately, the square, but it can be some bishop g4 check, or even knight g3 is not such a bad move, attacking the bishop, so the white king will be a little bit in trouble, so they played the knight to a3, leaving the square c3 for the king in case of some danger. And this knight wants to go to b5, and also, of course, now the rook is defending the square e1, and he's eyeing this knight maybe in the hand side. Now knight a6 was played. Okay, a little bit strange move. Knight, why exactly on a6? maybe to defend the square c7, maybe he was afraid of knight d5 and queen c7 checkmate, but he could have played bishop e6 maybe with a tempo, knight c6 or something else. Now queen h5 was played, and suddenly both pieces are attacked. So this was a big mistake, maybe knight f6, because now the bishop is under attack, and then the knight also. So Andersen maybe was thinking that after bishop f6, he is threatening to take on b2, and he can take the knight on a3, so it will be some kind of exchange. He is giving the knight on h1, but he is going to win the other knight. But after queen takes, bishop takes b2, now queen h4 check was played, and now the problem for black is that rook e7 is not possible, because then white can play rook e1, so white is winning, so they have to move the king somewhere, but king c7, and white can play knight d5 check, so he played king d7, but then just rook b1, bishop a3, queen a4 check. In this position Andersen resigned, which is okay, a little bit strange, because at that times they were playing until the end, and this is not completely lost position. Black can play, for instance, king d8 and queen f3, and they can still fight, knight c5 or something. They have rook and knight, but he decided that maybe Morphy is going to win this game, so he resigned. So this was a very beautiful, again, classical game between top players from this time. Now let's continue with another very funny game of Paul Morphy, which was played on his 12th birthday, and it was a blindfold, but still we're going to see how genius he was. And after h6 we're going into this line deviation of the King's Gambit, in which they're sacrificing a full piece, not only a pawn, but you see here white a full piece down, and looks like there is not big enough compensation, because white pieces are not developed, so they don't have the advantage into development. So they play queen g4. Now queen f6 was played in order to defend the pawn on f4, but queen f6 maybe is not the best move, and now bishop c4 check. King e7 is played, and now okay, maybe white can just take on g8 with the bishop, and they are going to win the piece back, because then d5, for instance, d5 is, I think, is too risky for black, because then the queen can go to c8, and when the rook takes on g8, white can just take on b7, and it will be a very complicated position, but in general, I think this should be okay for white, but Morphy decided to avoid this bishop g8 check, and instead he plays knight c3, so he can stop the move d5 with knight takes d5 check. And now black are playing normal looking move c6, defending against knight d5, and also in some moments, maybe again after bishop g8 maybe, or some other lines, they can play d5. And now Morphy has played one very typical move for these positions, e5. It's very often in this kind of openings, when the black king is in the center on e8 or e7, white are just giving this pawn just in order they can open the e file and explore it with the rook usually. And now black can play the queen g7, which was maybe the safest move, or take the pawn with the check, so they couldn't resist that they're taking with the check. And now king d1. So now obviously black have the idea of playing rook e1, but black could have played here the move, for example, knight f6, attacking the queen, and it's not so clear was it good enough this for white, because now if they remove the queen, black can even play maybe d5 and then knight e4, or just retreat with the king to d8, and it looks like it should be good for black, but instead this king d8 was played. Now rook e1. Here maybe still knight f6 is working, attacking the queen on g4, but queen c5, and finally white taking the piece, so now the pieces are equal, and they have the advantage a little bit because the black king is in some trouble. Now d5 was played, which turned out to be a big mistake. Black could have played maybe some other moves, which were not so bad for them, but after d5, this is actually looking like a normal move because you're developing your central pawn, the bishop is attacking the queen, and they were hoping maybe that white will move the queen, but the young Morphy has found a very nice combination, which is with the move rook e8 check, and now after king takes, he just took the bishop, and the only move is here. Now he could have taken on b7 and then take the rook on a8, but then black have a counterplay because they can give this check, queen g1 check and queen g2, and then the white king will be in danger, so white cannot just play some moves with the queen and take material, because they have to take care of their own king, and he found a very nice way to finish the game. Knight takes d5, taking advantage that pawn takes will lose the queen on c5, and after the only other move, king d6, queen c7 is a checkmate. So not a bad for 12 years old boy, this game. And now let's see another deviation of this line, which I told you that could lead to the knight sacrifice in King's Gambit. This is after bishop c4 and then g4. And now instead of knight e5, white can just play the move castle, which was played again from Adolf Andersen, and this time he has a serious competitor because Johannes Zukertort was also one of the top players of the 19th century. So he now took the knight, and queen f3 was played, again with this idea, queen takes f4 or even bishop f7 immediately, and the idea is to give quickly checkmate if it's possible. So queen f6 was at that time typical move because black were defending the pawn, and also the people in the past were enjoying when they played their queen early in the opening, because they felt since this is the most powerful piece, it's good to play her earlier. Nowadays it's not the same. Nowadays the opening theory is completely different. There are many openings in which queen is sitting in her initial position a long time. And now we are going to see again this move e5. We have seen in the previous example, again very typical move e5, just white giving this pawn in order to open the e file for their rook, and of course black took the pawn. Like I told you, it was a question of honor for them, and now the threat is queen d4 check to take the bishop, so therefore white are playing the move d3, defending the bishop, and also now they want to take with the bishop on f4, which will open the f file. Bishop h6 was played to defend the pawn. Now, of course, bishop f4 is not a good move, because after bishop takes, queen takes, if we exchange the queens, then it means that your attack is finished, and you end up in the endgame with a piece down. So you have to develop the pieces. Knight c3, very good move, normal move. Knight e7, and now bishop d2. A little bit modest move, but the most important thing was quickly to take control over the e file, so you can manage to put the rook on e1. And usually this is very typical for the gambits. When you sacrifice something, the idea is just quickly development of your pieces, no matter where exactly, just quick to develop everything. So then all the pieces are participating in the game, and if the opponent pieces are like now not completely developed here, to use this temporary advantage so you can win the game. Otherwise, if you delay the game and you play some slow moves, it will mean that your opponent has time to develop everything, and of course then he will be with the piece up. Now knight c6 was played, so black also managed to develop a few pieces, and they're meeting this rook e1 with the move queen f5. They could have played queen c5 check, but instead they decided to go with the queen to f5. Okay, maybe this is not the best decision, but now knight d5 followed here. Interesting move. Knight d5 is not very easy move because usually you don't want to trade pieces when you are piece up, and here after king d8 potentially, which is maybe the only move, means that you have to trade the knight for this to e7, because otherwise black can take on d5. But Andersen found a way to use this situation here with opening the big diagonal, and he put the bishop on c3, and the bishop is ready maybe to go to f6 if needed. For the moment he is attacking the rook. Rook e8 was played, so you see the black are defending here very good. So far they are not making some stupid moves. They are developing their pieces. So they have developed the knights, now they have developed the rook. And after knight f6 was played, and here black have a big choice. They could have left the rook, play a move like d6 or d5. They decided that they want to keep the rook, which is fine. And again, we have seen this typical move e5 from the previous game, which was used, and now we have seen the other idea, g4. This is reminding a little bit us the first game of Andersen when he also attacked the queen with the move g4. Of course, if black takes with the pawn on g3, then white are going to win on f5 the knight. So again, the queen is retreating on g6, and again Andersen is using his h-pawn. It's very funny, his king is on g1, but he is attacking with the pawns in front of his king. h4 and g4. Now the idea is maybe to play g5 and finally take this pawn on f4. By the way, it was funny how long this pawn on f4 has survived, because it was increasingly looking that white are going to take this pawn any moment and open the f-file. But we're here after 16 move, and this pawn is still closing the f-file. Now finally black are playing the move d6, developing the last piece, the bishop. g5 was played, but now this move is not attacking the bishop because the pawn is pinned, but bishop g7 was played nevertheless. So here the black are actually sitting very good. They have extra piece, and their king is more or less safe. And after queen f4, this is a position in which black have a piece up. White don't have even single pawn. Now, of course, there is this threat h5. So black are playing the move h6, so they can meet h5 with the pawn takes, or with the queen takes g5. And here Andersen couldn't find anything decisive to continue his attack, and play the move queen h2, just to avoid this hg5 moves with the tempo. And now black have played the move a6, which turned out to be in the end mistake, but for the moment this is not a big mistake, but still maybe they could have tried to develop the bishop somewhere, to play bishop f5 or play some other developing move. So instead this a6 was played. d4, now slowly white are improving their center, and they want to play actually the move bishop d3. And after bishop d3 the queen will be in danger again, and now black have to take to make some space for the queen. d5 was played, interesting move. Now take the pawn with the check, king h1, and now the knight is under attack. So black have decided to retreat on b8, and they thought that their king is very safe here, and next move they will play knight d7, attacking this knight on f6, and if they can remove the knight on f6 or trade it, it will be just winning position for them, because now they have one extra knight and also even two pawns. So in this position, by the way, when the knight is still here, maybe even the move like queen g3 was possible for black, because then for white have to retreat, have to trade the queens, because otherwise queen h3 check. So when they trade the queens, even if they take the knight back, they will be 2 or 3 pawns down. But after this move, now white have found a very beautiful combination. Queen takes d6. I'm sure Sugartoes was very angry when he saw this move, because his position was good and now in one move he is losing the game. But in sharp position it happens very often. You think that you have a good position and then you miss something and you lose the game. Now of course the idea is that after pawn takes, bishop a5. So now we see that this move a6 turned out to be a decisive mistake, because otherwise black could have just played b6, but now they are checkmated. So he played bishop d7, but after queen e7 he decided to resign, because the problem is that after king c8 white can take on d7 with the knight, and if knight d7 then queen e8 check, and it will be a checkmate here. So again, this is very classical and typical game for this opening. Now let's see some other moves for black. Instead of taking on f4, they can play many moves like I told you. For instance, they can play this move bishop c5, which looks like a mistake, because now maybe white can take the pawn. But it turns out that after queen h4, now white is losing, because g3, black will take on e4, and then they are going to win the rook. So actually, on every move black can play, the white cannot take immediately on e5. Even if they play a move like d6 or knight c6, this move is always losing. So after bishop c5, white have to play knight f3, and then black can play d6, and still with the same idea, if you take 2 times on e5, queen h4 in the end. So white can play bishop c4 here or knight c3. But the most popular actually reply, if you don't take on f4 in this position, if counter gambit for black, which is with the move d5. Again, taking advantage that this is not working, taking on e5, so white have to take on d5. And now black have many moves. They can take with the queen on d5, they can take on f4, but the most popular move is the move e4. The idea is that black wants to win this pawn after this, and they don't want to exchange these pawns on e5 for the pawn on f4, but with this move they are taking control of the square f3, so now knight f3 is not possible. And now I'm going to show you again one very classical game, and again our guest will be the great Paul Morphy. This time he was playing with black. Now knight c3 was played, which is a natural looking move, knight f6, and now d3. d3 is the only way to fight with this pawn, and the white have to do it sooner or later, otherwise they cannot develop the other knight. Bishop b4 developing with a tempo, with pinning the knight, and now bishop d2 is played. And here black have a big choice of moves. They can take on d3, and then they can castle, and later they can take on d5 with the knight. But Morphy has found a very interesting move for that time, which was the move e3. I think before him, most of the people were just taking on d3 or play bishop g4. But d3 is a very interesting move, sacrificing the second pawn, only to win one tempo, to castle. Now, this is, if we think a little bit, we can find some similarities with the move e5 from the previous games, when people were throwing the e-pawn in order to release the e file for their rook. So bishop d2 was played, rook c3 was played in order to take this knight so he cannot go back to defense. Now pawn takes, and now rook e8 check. Bishop e2 was played, and here black have again many moves. They can take on d5 with the knight or with the queen, but then the idea of white is to play knight f3 and castle, and if white can do it, they will have a good position, because this will mean that they have extra pawn and their king is safe. So bishop g4 is the best move, because now knight f3 will be met with bishop takes, and now white have to take with the pawn, which will compromise a little bit the position of their king, even if they can castle. But still black can play moves like queen e7 to keep the pressure on this bishop, so white have to play king f2. but white have decided to play the move c4, and they thought that okay, if bishop takes e2, just knight takes, and then more or less their king is safe. There are not enough pieces for black which can continue the attack, but Morphy has found again very nice way to put these pieces into a play, because this is the problem in black's position for the moment, that they are attacking with 3-4 pieces, but the other two are not participating. So he found this very beautiful move, c6. Okay, the idea is simple, just pawn takes on d5, and then develop the knight on c6, but white have decided to take on c6, which of course is a big mistake, because suddenly now the other knight is also coming to the battlefield, and the threat is very, very strong, knight d4. So maybe white were relying on this move, king f1, and they thought, again, if bishop takes, knight it takes e2, and okay, their king is again safe, but instead this, of course, Morphy just took on e2 with a rook, and now knight e2 follows knight d4. And now white are in trouble, because if they take the knight on d4 or they retreat to the knight, they're going to lose the queen. So they decided to leave the knight and played queen b1, bishop e2, and however black should still play some precise moves, because if they not win the game quickly, if they allow white to consolidate their position, the things will be not so simple in the end game. But they found a way. Again, knight g4 was played, and it's funny that how this bishop on e2 is actually participating into the attack, because he's taking some squares from the king. And now knight f3 was found here, a very nice combination. Check, white has to take, queen d4 check, king g2, these are the only moves, and again now check with the queen, queen f3 check, and white resign, because after the only move, king h8, there are many ways for black to finish the game. They can just play knight h6, for example, with a threat queen g4, and knight f5 check, and queen h5 checkmate. So this is again very interesting game by Paul Morphy, and we see that in his games these were the main principles, that he was trying to develop his pieces quickly and sacrifice some material if he can keep his opponent kings in the center and then launch a quick attack. Now let's turn our attention to another possible gambit, which is starting with the move d4. This is called Danish Gambit or Northern Gambit, in general some kind of Vikings gambits. Again, the idea is similar to the move f4, but with this move, of course here, first of all, white can take with the queen, but then black can play knight c6, and this is not the idea of the gambit. So again, we are sacrificing the pawn, but at least we are not putting our king into a compromised position, keeping the pawn on f2, so when we castle here, the king will be safe. And now, the continuation of this gambit with the move c3, inviting black to take on c3, which they, of course, they can do, or they can play any other moves, d5, knight c6, knight f6, but okay, they take on c3. And now there are two deviations of this gambit. White can take with the knight, so they sacrifice only one pawn in order to have better development, or they can continue with the gambits and play bishop c4, and after pawn takes, they will have these two excellent bishops on this diagonal. So this gambit is very dangerous for black if they don't know what to do, because these bishops are really strong. Okay, white are 2 pawns down, but it's not so simple for black to develop. So let's see some examples here. One of the first recorded games from 1863 was in this line, very interesting. So black had played the move bishop b4. Okay, in the past, and not only in the past, many of the people who begin to play chess and they're not so good, when they see a check, usually they give it, because they're very excited from this. But now bishop b4 gives white many possibilities, and also the pawn on g7 is a bit exposed. Knight c3 was played, but it's possible also to move the king, knight f6, and now knight e2 was played. interesting move, giving black the chance to capture another pawn, which they did with pleasure. So now castle. So again we see white are following the typical Gambits rules. Just quickly finish your development, no matter how. Castle, and then if the opponent king is in the center, try to attack him. So here knight takes c3, knight takes. And white are 3 pawns down, but they have a very strong initiative. And they have a threat, even let's say if black castle, it will be not so simple for them, because now there are ideas like knight d5, and then you have to play bishop c5 because otherwise queen d4 is coming, but then also queen g4 could be played, so the attack on g7 will be very strong. For instance, queen g4, now there is no defense, you cannot move the f pawn because knight f6 check, and if you play g6 again, knight f6 check, and you're in big trouble here on this diagonal. So black have decided to take on c3, take, and again now the castle is not working because of this idea, queen d4 and queen g4, but if you play queen d4, black can play queen g5 and defend the pawn. So this is better to play queen g4, and after the only move with the pawn somewhere, then we go queen d4, again f6 is not possible, and checkmate on the next move. So you see how dangerous is this gambit if black don't know what to do. So queen g5 was played to defend the pawn on g7, rook e1, king d8. So this is, we have seen in our previous example so many times that black king is hiding on d8, and white all the time want to take this pawn on g7 with a checkmate. And here the case is exactly the same. f4 was played. Now black can play queen c5 check, and then maybe white can play bishop g4, bishop takes g7 attacking the rook with the same idea, bishop f6 checkmate. Or they can just play king h1, and if you take the bishop again, bishop g7. But anyway, they took the pawn, bishop g7 was played, rook g8. So for the moment black defending the square f6, but now white have this very typical combination, which is with the move queen g4. And now of course if you take the queen, bishop f6 checkmate. This was played in the game, but still bishop f6 was played, and black resigned because after queen g8 it would be a checkmate. So you see again, this is a very interesting line. Another example which is very curious, because here the white was playing the great Russian writer Lev Tolstoy. So we're going to see what are the similarities between writing novels and books and playing chess. So he sacrificed again these 2 pawns, and black have played the move d6 this time, a little bit more modest. Queen b3, normal attacking move, but was met with queen e7, defending and also attacking the pawn on e4. Now knight c3 was played, again defending the pawn and with the idea knight d5. Knight d7 was played, a bit unusual move, but still this move is possible. And black are actually intending to put this knight on c5, so they can remove this queen from b3. So this is not maybe such a bad move. Knight f3, normal move. Knight c5 was played. The queen has to retreat on c2, and now bishop e6. So for the moment black are doing fine. They have 2 extra pawns, and they want to maybe one castle on the queen side. And here Tolstoy decided to jump with the knight on d5, because he wanted to keep his bishop on c4, and this is the only way to keep the bishop. Now black have to take with the bishop, and now black could have played the move c6 immediately. And then it's very complicated for white, because if you remove the bishop, then queen takes c4 check, trading the queens with many extra pawns. So probably after c6 they have to castle and to sacrifice the bishop. But fortunately for them, black have decided to play knight f6, and after castle, now they play the move c6. So now already Tolstoy decided that he will escape with the bishop on c4, leaving the pawn, but maybe black knew these examples from the previous games when white was sacrificing the e-pawn and opened the e-file, so they played instead rook d8, which is maybe not the best move also, because black have to try to castle quickly and hide their king, and with this move they are leaving the king in the center. And now after rook e1, knight e6 was played, but it's turned out that this is also a big mistake, because now after e5, again we see this typical idea, white opening the e-file, and after knight takes e5, now all the white pieces are participating into the attack. The both bishops, the knight on e5, the rook, the queen. So after g6, which was played a little bit late, now knight f7 follows. Very typical combination. Now queen takes, rook takes, e6 follows. And now white is winning. King d7 was played here. There are many moves for white which are winning. Rook d6 check, rook takes f6, bishop f6. They decided to go for this one. And now bishop e5 check. So they intend to finish the game with a checkmate. King b6 will be losing with rook b1. Bishop d6 was played in order to slow the attack. But now rook takes d6, attacking the queen. Queen e7, rook d7 check, double check. So the king has to go here. Now bishop c7 was played. At that time people were not resigning, they were playing until the mate. And now after a few more checks, finally the black king was checkmated. So this is a very nice example from the Russian writer and poet. Now let's take a look at the other deviation, in which after pawn takes c3, white attacking with a knight on c3. Therefore they have only one pawn down. And this is an example from the games of Alexander Alekhine, the former world champion, one of the best players in the chess history. And he was a great attacking player. So let's enjoy his game. Bishop c5 was played in this position. This move is a little bit ambitious, but in general, in the openings, usually, most of the time, this is better to develop first the knights and then the bishops. So now bishop c4 was played, and now queen f6. Interesting idea to checkmate the great world champion on f2 after 5 moves. But the problem is that he can see this threat, and he did. And he played knight f3, of course, and now this queen on f6 is not so good at all, because white can attack her with many moves, like knight d5 or e5, bishop g5. So black have to lose a lot of moves in order to play the queen somewhere. They played knight e7, and castle was played, and knight c6. And now, can you guess the correct move for white? I think you can. This is again e5. We have seen so often today this move, e5, sacrificing a pawn. Again, black took the pawn, and after this trade of knights, rook e1 was played, again with this similar idea to play knight d5. But queen d4 was played here, and Alekhine couldn't find a way to win his game here quickly, and he decided to play queen e2. Maybe he could have taken on d4 and then played knight d5, which looks very good for white, because knight from d5 will attack the knight on e7 and also here on c7. But he preferred to play queen e2 to keep the queens, and after this castle he played bishop g5. I think his idea was that he was hoping that in kind of move with a knight, let's say knight c6 or knight g6, he can just play the move rook d1 and trap the queen in the center. But his opponent maybe saw this, so he played d5. Now bishop d3 followed, and now knight f5. So it looks like black are doing fine, because they're keeping the extra pawns. But after the move rook d1, now we can see that again they're in trouble, because the threat is bishop takes e5, and the queen don't have any suitable places to go, and she has to go to b4, and now white taking with the tempo this pawn on d5, and again the queen is not so in good situation, so queen a5 is played. And here already white have many good possibilities, because the black pieces are having some problems with their coordination, and there are many different threats. White decided to play just queen f3, attacking the knight, and after knight d4 they found a very nice way to finish the game. Okay, if you split here the board on two, you are going to see that in this part of the table there are many black pieces and not single white, but in this part of the table we have all our pieces here, and only the black rook is here defending the black king. This means that there is time, and now white can make a combination. So usually when you wonder how can we decide during the game when is the time to make combination, this is one of the moments when you feel that you have more pieces in one part of the table, like now. So now follows bishop h7 check, king takes, and queen h5 check, king g8. So we have sacrificed our bishop in order to open the black's position, and now we can finish the game with another sacrifice, knight f6 check, black have to take, and now bishop takes, and the threat is queen h8 checkmate. So you see, with two sacrifices we still have enough pieces to finish the attack, because all the black pieces are far away from the king, but we have to be careful until the end, because now follows knight e2 check. And if you think, okay, what is this stupid check, I can just take here with the rook, let's say, and then give this checkmate, but then suddenly it will be another check, bishop f2, and when you take the bishop, you will lose the queen. So you have to be careful until the end, and Alechin met this check simply with the move king h1. So now if knight g3 check, then you can take with both pawns, and there is no defense against queen h8 checkmate. So this was for today. I hope you enjoyed this lecture for the gambits, and in general I think the gambits are the most interesting and entertaining part to play chess, because then you enjoy a lot your wins. When you play gambits you sacrifice something and then you win the game. The feeling is really good. You feel like you played like a genius, made a great combination, and if you play for fun, I recommend to play you a lot of gambits, because then the games are really excited for both players. So I hope you enjoy this video, and see you next time.